Hello, everybody, and welcome to Spiritual Awakening 101. My name is Jerry Yakov, Reverend Jerry Yakov, and my subject for today is the nature of the world. And that's a huge topic, and it's also the subject of many wisdom paths, the nature of the world. Some wisdom paths identify the world as unreal. Those are called non dualistic wisdom paths. In other words, there's only spiritual mind, spiritual essence, spiritual Christedness, um, the one identity expressing from God as God, and that there is no materiality, there is no form. That would be a non dualistic wisdom path or metaphysical teaching. The other wisdom paths, which are probably in the majority in terms of acceptance and the writings of many spiritual intellects is the dualistic path. And I would include in that even Buddhism. But suffice it to say that the dualistic path does not deny the body or the world, particularly the world. It says that it is a projected image from our minds in a sense that it exists. It doesn't exist independent of our minds, but it is consistent with and an effect of the thoughts of our minds. Then there's another wisdom path that says there's a pre existing world, independent of our own thoughts and our own mind. This would be the old mechanistic physics that is probably outdated now. But that said, that there is a world, and that we come to it with particular laws of measurement, and we can measure something that exists as an independent phenomenon. So those are the three that I'm aware of. I particularly like the non-dualistic view of the world, the view that there's only the Christ expression of God. It's an abstraction. There's no form. There's no measuring of love, of Christ, of salvation, of knowledge and wisdom. These are heavenly traits that are spiritual, and that's the non dualistic view. The world does not exist except in the minds of those who are mistaken, have fallen, in a sense, into ego thinking. Ego thinking is formula, is is form. Ego thinking is separation, dualism. So I subscribe to that one, but we'll get into that a little bit more deeply. The dualistic view, and I also appreciate that very much because it makes for a much more lovely experience of something like nature, something like another person's beauty, someone's intellect, someone's talents. You see that, yes, as part of your own um, existence, but you see it as separate from you as well. That person is gifted. This particular location is most beautiful. This sunset is particularly inspiring. Those kinds of thoughts are very uplifting. And I think that they can be put in a context of spirituality very nicely. Uh, However, and this is a big however, what about when nature turns against us with hurricanes and tornadoes and what are called natural acts of disaster? Is the world so beautiful then? Do we really want to say that it has an existence and I don't know, an energy that we can bow down to, so to speak, in an equivalency with our mind, our Christ mind? I don't think so. I think the Christ mind would definitely be of a higher order. And the world, uh, I think, is more in line with the quantum physics rather than the mechanistic physics of yesteryear. In other words, the observer, you and I, we're really making up in our minds first that which we're going to see with the body's eyes. Uh, this this then can be identified as a mistake or a distortion. The world can be seen also or instead by the Christ vision. Then we see it more with light, with aura, with vibration, with a feeling and experience of love. This would be more non-dualistic. It gets deep. These are deep waters, and I don't know if there's any definitive answer as to whether the world is dualistic or non-dualistic. Uh, the non-dualistic view, as I said, negates the existence of a world except as an illusion, and that would be really saying, in a sense, that there's no existence of the world. It's an illusion, and there's no hierarchy of reality of an illusion. Something that's an illusory can't be more real than other things in the illusory nature of the thing itself. Like I say, it gets into some very deep arguments, philosophical and metaphysical. The dualistic view, I do appreciate, though, as God expressing itself in form. And the science of mind or religious science movement, which I like to be a part of as well, identifies, in fact, let me read. This is the Science of Mind magazine from last year, and it always talks or writes and lists the precepts, what we believe. So let's see. It says, we believe in the individualization of the spirit in us, and that all people are individualizations of one spirit. So the individualization would refer to the body in a world of other bodies. And it says that we believe that it's an individualization of spirit. Um, and so spirit is expressing in form. Now, A Course in Miracles, and I'm a real avid student and teacher of A Course in Miracles, talks in terms of projection from the ego part of the mind, which is false. And it says that we project images from our ego mind in an attempt to make separation real. And then we've fallen asleep to our initial attempt and believe that that is the way things are and have always been that way, and that we didn't make it that way through our own minds and our own projections. So we say what's out there in the non-dualistic view would be such that we've projected it. It is false. It is the nature of a dream, the content of a dream, the figures in the dream are dreamlike. And when we wake up, which would be really a more of a Hindu view of Maya, Maya, the illusory nature of the world, we wake up to the reality of the highest self, which has no parameters, it has no separation from other highest expressions of self. There's only the one, Krishna or Christ or Buddha. So again, you study these things, you find out what resonates with you and for you, and what can take you to the highest level of a state of actualization, self-realization, enlightenment. This is what appeals to me. Well, here's a reading from the Science of Mind magazine, and it's dated Sunday, October 13th from last year. The spiritual body. So here we're getting an example of the dualistic sense of Science of Mind. And here's a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson to begin. God enters by a private door into every individual. So Emerson is saying that we have within us a spirit, a light, an emanation from the God self or headwaters, and we are water, but we're expressed as separate from the headwaters. It's kind of like a wave on the ocean. But you can also say that since the wave is on the ocean, it's really one with the ocean because it's all water. This is the nice metaphor that describes the illusion, so to speak, of separation. You can identify a wave, but it's brief, it's impermanent, it doesn't last. But its content really is water. And I would say that comes close to identifying who and what we are. We're an expression of love. God is love, and we're the wave or the body which expresses love on an impermanent basis. And then we go back to the emanation source or the headwaters of love itself, which is God. And so, would you argue that there's a dualism there? Would you argue that the world is filled with waves and that they really exist and that the nature of the waves is really love and that that's all a unified uh, existence and not separate and not dualistic and that there's no observer and no observed? It's all one. Yeah, I'm glad to be able to kind of spout these things that I've been reading and studying and learning. Um, what I've come to really understand, though, is that there is the highest idealized nature of you and me, and it really isn't the body. When we die, as an example, we lay the body down. The body is no longer inhabited by a spirit. The spirit rises in some traditions. In the Jewish Hebrew tradition, for instance, the soul rises back up to the heavenly source from which the soul had come from. But the body, and again in the Hindu tradition, is burned at the time of the passing or transition of the individual, because they know that the real essence of life is no longer within the body. It's no longer there. The body housed it. The body was kind of like a garment that was then taken off, and the real nature of the self, the soul self, uh, would go on probably in a rebirth or reincarnation to another garment, so that it's observable in the third, three-dimensional world or dimension of time and space. You can see a soul when it's within a garment of a body. I think a strict non-dualistic view would be that the garment that seems to be taken on as a body for purposes of seeing individually and separately you from me, uh, that's an illusion. And that would be a world that is made up contrary to God's will. God's will is one of Christ and of unification in a dimension of unanimity and oneness and perfect peace and serenity. No distinctions, no form, no conflict, no duality, no separation of mind and thought, no split mind. None of those things come into play in the Course in Miracles perspective. And I think the true perception, is that it is of that nature. We see each other um, with the Christ vision, and then we look past the form, and we have a joining of our minds. Minds, soul, Christ, those are equivalencies. Body takes us into the realm of the illusory. So am I waffling here, or is this making sense? And then, you pick your wisdom path and you proceed in the way back to your highest and best self, which would ideally be the Christ, and it has no form. Ideally, it would be the Tao. The Tao is the way, and the way has no form, has no direction, has no duality. There's no up or down with the way, east, north, south, or west. There's no directionality. There's no linearity. You don't go in a straight line on a horizontal plane with, like time. Time is an illusion for the same reason. It's dualistic in thinking. It separates the past from the present. separates the present from the expected future. All of these things are great philosophical and spiritual questions. I want to read a little bit more from this Science of Mind magazine. And again, it's dualistic in its thinking or its presentation. The infinite mind must be manifest. So infinite mind would be everywhere and nowhere, infinite. But it then must manifest and must concretize, must be a phenomenal manifestation. It must manifest itself in persons, places, and things. If the infinite mind were not active, it would be unconscious. Everything in the manifest universe is the result of its activity. It is this activity as its own effect. Well, A Course in Miracles would definitely disagree with that. There is no effect called world because there's no cause called ego. And the Course states that ego is the projecting mechanism by which we then imagine seeing an effect called the world and the body. However, here they're making it a statement of fact that the infinite must manifest as the finite. In practicing the science of mind, we do not deny the physical body nor the physical universe. Instead of denying the physical universe, we affirm that it is controlled and governed by a principle of harmony, of unity, and of peace. It is necessary that life clothe itself in form, else it would remain unexpressed. Creation is a result of the self-knowingness of the creative spirit. Consciousness clothes itself in form in the individual life as well as in the universe. The physical body is not an illusion, nor is it unreal, but it is an effect contained within something that projects and governs it. It is subject to this higher intelligence. We never deny the physical body or the physical organs. We affirm that the body is a spiritual idea, that every organ, action, and function must have a spiritual prototype or equivalent back of or within it. The practitioner affirms a body that is spiritual here and now, a body of right ideas, harmoniously adjusted to each other, functioning in accord with natural rhythm and harmony. Well, here you have wisdom consistent with I guess what I had said earlier, the majority opinion. If you're born under a particular sign, this has an effect on you and your psyche and maybe your body, but certainly your mental equivalency. What sign were you born under? What rotation of the planets? What alignment with the moon? How does the moon affect the body? These are all questions, metaphysical questions, that are steeped in a dualistic view of spirituality. Uh, Whereas you wouldn't get into these kinds of energetic questions, vibratory questions in a non-dualistic view. They simply don't exist because there's no effect from a cause which is non-existent. And so, again, it's basically negating the non-dualistic view. Basically negates the entirety of the three-dimensional world. Okay, it says here in the last paragraph, we are not creating a spiritual body, but realizing that there must be one. Because we focus this realization for a definite purpose, the reaction will permit a more complete flow of spiritual life. Well, I think that's debatable. Do we really need form and a manifestation or a demonstration of the infinite to have a more complete flow of spiritual life? I've had out-of-body experiences where I was completely conscious, in fact, conscious at a higher level than I am when I'm centered in my body. Does that mean then that the body was more of a fence or a binding of the soul, which is my real identity? according to a science of mind, this would be the subject of a conversation. Um, and it would be saying, in a sense, to have a true sense of the spiritual, you need to identify the body. But the body is impermanent. To identify as a body, which ages, which is distinguishable from other bodies and ethnicities and so forth, culture, and again, energy and vibration. All these things are questionable. But I like questions. I think the questions are useful. Um, but at some point, you have to, I believe, center yourself in what you would consider the truth. Not a truth, but the truth. Is there the truth as a universal truth? Well, I think there must be. I don't have the answer. I do have a practice. And the practice for me is basically going within uh, to the abstraction of self rather than the concretized idea of Jerry. I'm not Jerry because that's only an iteration of a rebirth. That's a belief system and a projection of the ego and separation. I believe that there's a universal truth that transcends the ego and Jerry, in my case, or in your case, it would transcend who you believe you are as may believe you are as a body and as a name. And there, at the highest levels of consciousness, we are one. There has to be a unification of consciousness in Christ or in the Tao or the Buddha, which is not in any way um, individualized or contained within. It can't be contained. It's too it's infinite. So how can a soul or how can the Tao be contained? It's everywhere. It's everything. So I tend towards that in the great question of the ineffable, the beginningless and the endless, the timeless. That's what I understand to be the truth for my path. Now, do I revert back most of the time in my thinking to a dualistic view of me as separate and me as vulnerable and me as many times a victim, subject to a victimizer who's outside of me and can threaten me? The Course makes it very clear that nothing unreal exists. So here I am making up an identity and making up a storyline or script about a life that the Course in Miracles says is imaginary. However, others, again in the in the dualistic view, would deeply look into the nature of man. The Jungian school, for instance, looks deeply into the myths, but also looks into the prototypes, that we adopt: the king, the jester, the comic, and I'm not very much up on a lot of the mythology, but it seems to point to roles that we play. And I think the very nature of the role would be such that it's not real. It's a play. Shakespeare himself said all the world is a stage, and every man struts and spouts his lines, uh, but then goes off stage and is no more. So it's a reference, I think, to the non-duality of the truth. Well, obviously, I'm not a guru. I'm a student and a teacher of metaphysics, and I'm trying to live the most happy and I would say selfless life that I can. What does happy and selfless mean? I think it means being of service and recognizing that I am my neighbor. I am one with God. The degree and to the extent and to the definitive form in which that takes place uh, is probably above my pay grade currently. And I don't have any definite answers other than to say I feel much happier and more centered and more peaceful and serene than I've ever felt. So I must be on the right path. I'm headed in the right direction. Where the direction ultimately takes me. Uh, Many mystics have spoken about it. Jesus, Lao Tzu. Uh, I love the topic, and I love reading what the mystics and the gurus and the ascended masters have to say. If you haven't read Autobiography of a Yogi, which is Paramahansa Yogananda's book, his autobiography of a yogi, read that. I think that's a wonderful primer for this topic of what is the world and what is the nature of man and God. But then there are so many others as well. I gain a lot of faith and trust from the Bible, both the Old and the New Testament. When you dig more deeply, there's so many things to learn on a metaphysical level. The Garden of Eden story comes to mind. I love to analyze the Garden of Eden story because it's a perfect template, if you will, for the dualistic story of man. They eat of the tree of good and evil, and there's your dualism right there. The apple off the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And what happens is there's a fall from heaven where all was one. And then you go into the dualistic world. And then you have man and woman. You have opposites. You have the yin and the yang. So it's a wonderful story, but not to be taken literally per se, but to be taken metaphysically. There's wonderful directionality. The Buddhists say the finger that points to the moon is not the moon. It's the finger pointing to the moon. Well, I feel that, by and large, in these conversations, we're discussing the pointing, the directionality of the finger, and we're looking at the moon. Does the moon exceed our grasp? I don't think so. I think again, it's a metaphor, but I think that we are basically the moon. We are the sun. We are the stars. We are that which we view as separate from us. We're one with it. It's just that in our minds, we don't experience it that way when we're on the lower rungs of the ladder of atonement at one-ment with God as Christ. Well, we're getting to the end of the session, this video. I want to thank again the NECAT network for hosting this show and putting it on YouTube and on the air on its channels. I want to thank you, those of you that have watched. I appreciate you very much. I hope this has been of value. There was one particular person that asked that I do a subject called the world and the nature of the world, and I hope that she gets a chance to see this. I call her Mama, and I hope you get to see this video, Mama. I love you, and I love all of you as I love myself, as I love the Christ. Thank you, and we'll see you next time. Namaste. Peace and shalom.